Good morning, Mr. Casson, Dr. Grogan, honoured guests and members of the AIS community. Anzac Day, the 25th of April, marks the first campaign of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps at Gallipoli against the Ottoman Empire, now modern-day Turkey. 8,709 Australians and 2,779 New Zealanders lost their lives in the unsuccessful attempt to control the Dardanelles. However, the sacrifice of both these young nations pales in comparison to the 86,692 Ottomans who died defending their homeland. The service of the men and women during World War are immortalised in the stories of Albert Jacka, Cyril Bassett, Sister Claire Trestrail, and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk.
Today, Anzac Day goes beyond the anniversary of the landing on Gallipoli in 1915. It is the day on which we remember all soldiers who served and died in war and on operational service. The spirit of Anzac, with its qualities of courage, of mateship, and of sacrifice, continues to have meaning and relevance for our sense of national identity. Please welcome the head of secondary, Mr. Brad Bird, for his welcome address.
Hello all, and welcome to our special Anzac Day commemoration service. Today we will hear messages from very important people who represent Australia and New Zealand officially, and we will uphold some of the traditions of this very important day. At AIS, it is crucial that we celebrate our association with Australia and New Zealand. Having these ceremonies allows us to create culture and legacy and builds on the history of our great school. My job today is to share a little about why Anzac Day is important to me. Anzac Day for me means we are united by sacrifice and by the tragedy of war. It is a universal and unifying story about courage and adversity. Every year on this day, I ask myself two fundamental questions. Why did they fight? And why do we still fight? I believe we do so because of the principles that stretch back to the birth of Western civilization, truly fundamental principles that form the bedrock of modern democracies. The principle of justice, the principle that nations that trample on the rights of others must be resisted and opposed. Wrongs must be righted. Australia and New Zealand, as a rule, do not put their young men and women in harm's way unless it can be justified by more than self-interest of empire builders. Because they do more than just honourably defend us, they are fighting for these universal principles. Because underlying those universal principles is the notion and the pursuit of equality for all. This, for me, is the central idea that drives us, the idea of egalitarianism, that one person is as good as the next. No one is better. We are all the same. This ideal is no master, no servant, just individuals bound together as equals fighting for a common cause. The officers and the soldiers that fought for us were not treated as separate castes. Our commanders valued their lives and made sure that they spent them with the utmost reluctance. Of course, these egalitarian ideals were not born at Gallipoli. Australia and New Zealand were egalitarian from birth. But at Gallipoli, these ideas were tested and proved their worth. What emerged was a moral code that rapidly established itself as our supreme nation's virtues, a combination of bravery, resilience, the ability to improvise, and sticking together in hard times no matter what. It is a national story, a story about being there for others when they need help, no matter where they are or who they are. It is about defending anyone's right to pursue their own small patch of equality. What my grandfather and my great-grandfather and those who lie in numerous graves across the world believed was this: that a nation founded on the universal principle of equality is a nation worth fighting for. So that's what Anzac Day means to me. We salute those who have done the hard work before us so that we can enjoy what we have today. But what they fought for was equality and making sure that everything was right in the world. Thank you.
It is our pleasure to welcome Warrant Officer Brendan Woodsell to share his thoughts on the importance of Anzac Day. Warrant Officer Brendan Woodsell has a career in the Royal Australian Navy spanning 43 years. He has spent over 22 years at sea, serving on HMAS Arunta, Stirling, and Cerberus. As a part of this, he has participated in major international exercises in Asia, the Indian Ocean, and Hawaii, in addition to border protection, peacekeeping, and anti-terrorist operations. As a result, he has been awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia and Conspicuous Service Medal for his meritorious service. Please welcome Warrant Officer Brendan Woodsell.
My name is Warrant Officer Brendan Woodsell, and I am the Defence Administrative Assistant at the Australian High Commission here in Singapore. I joined the Navy in January 1978 from a small country town in Victoria, and I'm often asked, why did I join the Navy? I joined the Navy for mateship, for travel, and just to really have a good time. So what is the importance of Anzac Day to me? Anzac Day to me is a time where we can reflect, to remember, not only those that landed at Gallipoli, but also of the some 150,000 Australians that died in all wars, and those that not only died, but were injured and repatriated back to Australia. I'm often asked how I see the Anzac values demonstrated by our ADF men and women in the current times. Well, previous times to this, I've seen them demonstrated by assisting in commemorative services, assisting the community with bushfires, flooding, and current times with the cyclone that has just devastated a town in Western Australia, but also when the government needed assistance with the current COVID situation, they called on the Defence Force to assist them. That's how I see the Anzac spirit embodied. I'm often asked, is the Anzac spirit relevant to today? And I feel it is. Our young people, they embrace it. It's very, very heartening when you turn out to a commemorative service. In my previous role, I was fortunate enough to turn out at the dawn service at the War Memorial in Melbourne, and we had anything up to 20,000 people that would turn out to the dawn service, and a vast majority of those were young people that embraced what Anzac Day means and what it stands for. And it's not just remembering war, but it's commemorating those that have fallen and those that have gone before us. So I thank you for inviting me to be part of your Anzac Day commemoration at the Australian International School. So thank you, goodbye.
We are honoured to welcome the Australian High Commissioner to Singapore, Mr. William Hodgman, and the New Zealand High Commissioner to Singapore, Ms. Jo Tyndall, to share some recollections on Anzac Day. Newly appointed, Mr. William Hodgman was announced as Australian Commission in November 2020. Prior to this, he served in the Parliament of Tasmania from 2002 until 2020, including as the state's 45th Premier between 2014 and 2020. As Premier of Tasmania, Mr. Hodgman initiated trade missions to the Indo-Pacific and Europe to promote economic, cultural, and social links with Tasmania. His focus this year is on implementing digital, environmental, and military agreements, and advancing new work in areas including digital standards, food and health security, renewable energy, and business engagement.
As High Commissioner, Ms. Jo Tyndall is responsible for promoting and overseeing New Zealand's interest in Singapore. This includes developing the political, trade and economic, defence and security, science and innovation, and people-to-people relationships with Singapore. Prior to this, Ms. Tyndall was New Zealand's Climate Change Ambassador. From 2016 to December 2018, she also co-chaired the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change's ad hoc working group on the Paris Agreement. As Climate Change Ambassador, she was head of delegation to the United Nations climate negotiations with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade from July 2010 to March 2016. Please welcome Mr. Hodgman and Ms. Tyndall.
Good morning. It's a great privilege to join the Australian International School's virtual Anzac Day commemoration. On this day in 1915, thousands of Australians and New Zealanders, alongside soldiers from other nations, landed on the shores of Gallipoli, beginning a hard-fought and bloody campaign that lasted 8 months. Arguably a flawed tactical and strategic endeavour, what cannot be questioned is the remarkable bravery and the immense sacrifice of the thousands who landed and died on the very first day of the campaign alone. It's also widely accepted that the events of April 25, 106 years ago, helped shape and define two great nations, Australia and New Zealand. Importantly, while we think of that one day at Gallipoli, today we should also remember the more than 150,000 Australians and New Zealanders who've been lost in war since, over the past century. Today I wanted to share with you a bit about the contribution of Indigenous Australian soldiers in the Second World War, and specifically the story of one Aboriginal soldier who fought and died here in Singapore. At Kranji War Cemetery in Singapore, where we would normally hold a public commemoration ceremony today, the pillars that support the memorial bear the names of 24,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen and nurses killed during the Singapore-Malaya campaign, whose bodies were never recovered and who have no known grave. There are also 3,702 graves of known brave soldiers of many countries, as well as 850 interned soldiers known only to God. Of the 1,048 known Australians buried at Kranji, 6 are Indigenous Australians. It's estimated that around 3,000 Aboriginals and 850 Torres Strait Islanders enlisted in World War II, but the exact number who served is unclear. Their Aboriginal heritage was not recorded. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders were not even formally recognised as Australian citizens. They had no right to vote. But in World War II, around 4,000 traditional owners still enlisted to protect their country and defend our nation. They were initially excluded from joining military service or given limited roles in smaller units. But when Japan entered the war and Australia needed more personnel, the restrictions were lifted and they served, including here in Singapore. 122 Indigenous Australians became prisoners of war during the conflicts of World War II, of which 74, or around 2/3, were captured in the Malay-Singapore campaign. Private John Knox was one of them, and he's buried at Kranji. Born at the turn of the century on Kamilaroi Nation country in central New South Wales, Private Knox enlisted in the Australian Army in Queensland in 1940. He was a member of the 2nd 26th Infantry Battalion who fought valiantly alongside fellow Australians in the fall of Singapore. And after the Allied surrender on February the 15th, 1942, he became a prisoner of war interned at Changi. Like so many, he died there. Like many others, his remains were repatriated at Kranji. Rightly, his dedicated service saw him receive the 1939-45 Star, the Pacific Star, War Medal 1939-45, and the Australian Service Medal. But for many years, Aboriginal soldiers weren't appropriately recognised or awarded for their service to our country. Today, we remember them all and we honour their service, lest we forget.
This is a poem about Gallipoli, written by an unknown New Zealander in 1915. They came from field and factory, from desk and fishing fleet, from shearing shed and foundry, from hill and plain and street, kin of the old sea rovers, sons of that stubborn strain that swallowed all invasions, Saxon, Norse and Dane. Men of the far young countries knew won by their fathers' toil, taught from an endless striving, sons of the sea and the soil. Little they knew of warfare. Their lesson was all to learn. These men of the golden wattle, these lads of the silver fern. The hush of a chill spring morning, the race to the ragged beach, the hail of the searing shrapnel and the big shell's angry screech, up and up to the ridges, through the bullet-belching brush, to the hell of a fire-girt dawning and the flame-edged Turkish rush. The soft Levantine breezes steal o'er the storied spot, the flanks of Aichi Baba, the red-stained daisy plot. The gullies east of Anzac, the slopes of Surrey Bare are silent now, yet ever we honour those who are there. Their names shall live forever in the halls of memory. They gave their lives as ransom that we who live be free. They bought us peace and freedom, nor grudged the utmost price. God grant that we prove worthy of their great sacrifice.
On this day, 106 years ago, Australians and New Zealanders fought side by side, landing in a place far from their homelands. A place that would become known as Anzac Cove. Though the Gallipoli campaign would end 9 months later with the evacuation, those who survived would be joined by reinforcements to fight for another 3 years, until the guns finally fell silent in 1918. In military tradition, the Ode of Remembrance from the poem For the Fallen commemorates wartime services. This is followed by the last post, which is the bugle call that signifies the end of the day's activities. It is also sounded at military funerals to indicate that the soldier has gone for their final rest. The minute's silence offers us all a chance to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who serve. This will be followed by the rouse, which symbolizes an awakening in a better world for those who have passed, and also rouses the living back to duty now that their respects have been paid in the memory of their comrades. I will invite you to please stand for the ode and remain standing for the duration of the ceremony. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Thank you for joining the Australian International School virtual Anzac Day commemoration service. The Anzac spirit, although forged during the Gallipoli campaign, has become a powerful driving sensation that can not only be felt, but seen through work of the Australian and New Zealand Defence Force. To those men and women who continue to sacrifice their lives to serve us, we remember you.
Thank you.